We're looking at a $750 million hit in the fourth quarter of this year, January till March, and a staggering $3 billion next year. That's why I've directed my agencies to identify creative strategies that will limit long-term damage to vital programs. But also, during our budget process, we had some instinct that this would happen, something would happen. That's why we stopped $400 billion in spending that was anticipated back during our budgeting process. That's why our one-time $3 billion inflation rebate is now a $2 billion inflation rebate, cutting a program that I believe in, but also trying to be cognizant of the fact that we may need that money for future challenges. Again, not knowing the details. And truthfully, we don't have the full picture of what's going to happen because this is just reconciliation, which doesn't mean a lot to people. All they know this is going to be painful. But the budget that could even wreak more havoc on us comes out this fall. So the clear scenario that shows us exactly what is happening is not there entirely. But we're prepared. As I said, we talked about this spring after the Trump election, and he started telegraphing what his intentions were. So we've been ready. We're prepared. And I want people to know this. They have a state government filled with incredibly competent people who will get us through this. Unlike Republicans in Washington, we actually care about families. We worry about them. We stress about them. And we actually have something called compassion for those whom life has been hard. And I'll continue to make every New Yorker my top priority as we go through these storms. I asked a number of my members of my cabinet to join us here today. We have Secretary to the Governor Karen Keogh, Catherine Garcia, the Director of State Operations, Brian Mahana, our Counsel to the Governor, Blake Washington, our Budget Director. But I also invited people from the agencies. So if you have questions about some of the impact on specific agencies, you can hear from Willow Bear, the Commissioner of the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, Richard Ball, the Commissioner of Agriculture and Markets, Jackie Bray, the Commissioner of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Barbara Gwynn, the Commissioner of the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, Hope Knight, President of Empire State Development, Dr. James McDonald, the Commissioner of the Department of Health, and Ruth Ann Visnaskis, the Director of Community Homes and Community Renewal. They're here because they're the ones that are going to have to help us navigate these uncharted waters, these unnecessarily rough waters. But we're ready for this. We know how to do this. We've been through battles before. We've had challenges. I was governor just about 2.5 months when Omicron hit. Then we had inflation. Then we had supply chain challenges. Then we had the migration wave of 220-some thousand people arriving in our state. So we're battle tested. We're ready to lead. We have been leading. But I want you to have an opportunity to ask questions directly from the people that will be joining me in our efforts to just manage this crisis inflicted upon all of us from the President and the Republicans in the state of New York who did not have the political courage to cast a vote against something that they knew would be devastating for their own districts.
Well, first, I heard that you have a new granddaughter,
Yes, thank
Governor.
you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very exciting. So my understanding, obviously, there's a lot in this big, beautiful bill, and you've outlined a number of the points. But my understanding is that sort of the biggest hit New York State is going to take is from its practice of providing health care for undocumented people. I'm curious, just from a purely fiscal perspective, whether or not you are considering any sort of legislative action to change the state's policy. Is that to kind of capitulate to the Trump administration and stop covering those healthcare services? Is that something that's on the table for you?
We're having discussions now internally, but also with the leaders. We'll be engaging the leaders of the legislature during this time when we have an opportunity to really assess the impacts. Program like that, I think, is about $3 billion. Is there anything to add to that, Blake?
The one thing I'll add, Governor, is that most of the persons we're talking about, the non-citizens that are covered under current law are green card holders and persons that have been here, large case, plus or minus 5 years, and preceding the crisis in many cases of just the last year and a half, 2 years. So.
You are still considering looking at whether the state will continue to cover their health care?
If the state were to cover 100% of those persons as they migrate to the general fund only, it would cost $3 billion. So that's the public number we're carrying.
Governor, and for Commissioner Ball, I'm actually curious because the bill boosts funding for ICE. Obviously, we've seen deportations ramp up in New York. I'm curious about how that's affecting farms in New York. Are farmers concerned about that? And what is the impact, I guess, on the state overall from those actions?
I'll let the commissioner address that, but are farmers concerned? They're just so shocked that someone they probably voted for has turned on them in this way. Not just the family in Sackett's Harbor, Tom Homan's hometown that I think I've talked to you about before, where a third grader and her twin brothers in high school and their mother were whisked off to a detention camp. Dad wasn't home because why? It's 6 a.m. on a Saturday. He was milking cows. ICE agents burst in the door, blaring their guns with, of course, the masks to cover up their identity. That farm community, that rural community, I will go out on a limb and say that probably Republican community was outraged by those actions. The community rose up. I got involved. The family was returned. But that had a ripple effect throughout the state. Then when I was in the North Country in Saranac Lake a couple weeks ago, I had 400 people in a village hall. Standing room only, people wanted to hear what I had to say about the impacts of tariffs, the health care cuts, the impact of the Canadians not coming over. Therefore, the downtowns are no longer chock full of tourists this time of year. But what got the most attention in that conversation, I let all these individuals speak about what the impacts were being felt. When the farmer got up and talked about, someone from the Farm Bureau talked about the raids on farms and how, first of all, at a human level, these are relationships that are built over years. Same people go back year after year to the farms and provide an indispensable service to us. They also talked about the terror of seeing people unidentified arriving, guns, masks, not sure if this is a legitimate raid or someone masquerading as ICE. So first of all, there's a fear factor. Then the question is, who's milking the cows today? If the workers are rounded up, thrown in vans and taken away to detention centers, who is taking care of the crops? Who's managing the farm? So Commissioner Ball can give you more details, but the fear is palpable across our state. And the sense of betrayal that they're experiencing is very real. Commissioner Ball?
Yeah, thank you, Governor. I think the governor articulated the situation pretty well. I think the level of uncertainty on our farms across the state is very, very high. We rely on a workforce. This is not just simply a workforce issue. It's a food security issue. It becomes an animal welfare issue. How do we take care of the animals? How do we supply the food? How do we get the job done? And I really have to say that this has been a failure by the federal government for decades to deal with a workable guest worker program. We want our workers to be legal and have legal status in the United States of America. And it hasn't been dealt with in decades. But the pressure right now on our farms is enormous. And wondering if on the kitchen table in the morning before a farmer heads out, if he's going to be able to get the work done, what's going to happen on his farms. That uncertainty in the workforce, that uncertainty on the farm is very, very difficult, very palpable. For the workers, many workers are disappearing. They're not showing up to work. And they're afraid to go to Walmart on Saturday, they're afraid to go to church on Sunday because they'll be targeted because of their ethnicity. So it's a huge factor.
Governor, for you and also for Commissioner McDonald. On the subject of North Country hospitals, obviously many of them treat a lot of Medicare and Medicaid covered individuals. These cuts are predicted to have outsized impact on those hospitals. Is there anything the state is able to do to buoy a hospital that is in danger of failing? And are you considering any specific interventions at this time?
No, we have to look at the whole picture. Again, I would encourage all of you to ask the members of Congress who represent those areas what they plan to do about it. What are they telling the hospital administrators who came to my forum and are in a panic? What are you telling the healthcare workers who will lose their jobs? An estimated 67,000 healthcare workers will lose their jobs. So I would first ask the question, before you ask me, ask them how they plan to deal with this. That is a fair and legitimate question that I'm not hearing enough of. But as far as how we're managing this, it's going to be talking about all these areas that are going to need funding that used to come from the federal government. I'll tell you right now, there is not a single state in our nation that can backfill that loss of money. We get $93 billion a year directly from the federal government, not including all the money that goes directly to hospitals. As I mentioned, $13.5 billion loss in money. So, Blake, we're talking about the options here, but that has not been determined yet of what we can actually do, other than it is a huge concern of ours. Anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Governor. So a couple points. I think, yeah, I'm worried about hospitals in North Country. I'm worried about all the hospitals. So there's a couple things that we can do and really things we should do. One of the things we've been trying to do in New York is help hospitals and nursing homes lower healthcare costs. Part of that's by looking at scope of practice of healthcare providers in New York State. You know, we proposed this in the budget this year. It didn't happen, but medication aids in nursing homes, 38 states do this. New York hasn't done this yet. We need the legislature to help us with that. Another example of where we could use some help, there's a nursing shortage. Now, we have over $700 million that New York is investing between now and March 31st of 2027. We have 3 workforce innovation organizations. We are doing a lot to get more people interested in healthcare. But we have to look at some of the basic things. If every other state figured out a solution, why haven't we? And one of the things where we have an answer is like, a medical assistant can give a vaccine in 49 other states, in the military, in the VA, in the Indian Health Service, everywhere else. This is something where we have nurses simply working just to give a vaccine. We can't keep doing these things. We have to catch up with other states in these spaces. So one of the things we need to focus on is how do we listen to what hospitals are asking us to do, what nursing homes are asking us to do, and I just need the legislature to partner with us on some of these things. And one of the things I want to share with all of you too is I actually read the entire 870-page bill. And some of you haven't because there's stories to be told there, my friends. But there's a lot of nooks and crannies in there. Go look around page 630 where you talk about Medicaid. One of the little nooks and crannies in there that's just sort of fascinating to me is they expect states to charge people who are at the federal poverty line to 138% a copay, up to $35. Now, I don't expect people to know the federal poverty limit off the top of your head, but that's a little over $15,000 for an individual for 100% federal poverty and around $22,000 for 138%. I don't know if you guys know this, but most people making between $15,000 to $22,000 a year can't afford $1 to pay for a healthcare service, let alone up to $35. There's a lot of things in this law that I think people need to look at and wonder, what were people thinking? It's certainly about it's not about making anyone healthy again, though, my friends.
Can I just reinforce what you said about the scope of practice? This is an enormous source of frustration for me, that we can't get the legislature and the Department of Education to sign on to what other states are doing, which is to allow highly trained individuals to take on one more activity instead of us having to hire 2 people to do that activity, the person for the primary nursing and then someone to administer other vaccinations. So I'm just fed up with the absurdity of some of these policies, to be honest with you. There's no reason why we should not be leaning hard into finding all the ways that we can support health care. And as he raised that again, I could hear the frustration in his voice, and my blood pressure went up a little bit, because this is something that should have happened a long time ago, and we're going to take it on once again. We just need more cooperation.
such a short amount of time has created difficulties. So, how is New York gonna, proceed with this? I know it's a short requirement that you have.
No, certainly, and we spoke about this at our cabinet meeting this morning, and Catherine Garcia, our head of state operations, identified how challenging this is, but also explained that we'll get it done. Catherine?
Absolutely. We've been looking at this for a while in terms of how are we going to build the Tiger team to drive this over the line. It's in some ways a big IT challenge, but right this second, we don't have the full rules of the road of what is work requirements or volunteer or education 80 hours a month. What is going to be acceptable to the federal government when we do the submissions to be able to move forward. But we know that it's going to happen in SNAP, we know that it's going to happen in Medicaid, that we have a system and a program that can work across all of those.
And what would you do to ensure that this doesn't lead to people being just dropped from the program? Because I know in a lot of places where this is put in, the intention is to shrink the Medicaid program.
Well, there wouldn't be savings attached to it if they didn't assume that people would drop out. We are going to do it in a ton of outreach and try and make that happen. But let's be clear. We do anticipate that folks will struggle to continuously recertify every 6 months and have all of the documentation that they're going to need to have to meet this requirement. That's what we have seen historically, and this is what the federal government very intentionally is doing. But we will work through our nonprofits, work through our local government organizations to assist and ensure that people are able to transition to regular Medicaid. But we know that it's tough, and the recertification clock is very hard for people.
Governor, I believe you mentioned directing commissioners to identify areas within their own agencies that they can find deficiencies. What do some of those look like potentially, and are personnel cuts on the table?
These are issues I'll be speaking to the leaders about as well, about what number we need to hit and how we want to hit it. So I'm not going to talk about cuts at this time. I'm going to tell you that those conversations are very robust. But each department head knows where they can go. I mean, for example, the MTA, we told them to find, was it, Catherine, $3 billion?
Well, $300 million to fund the $3 billion.
Yeah, $300 million. We directed them to find $300 million. They will find $300 million. So I will leave it to the agency heads, unless Catherine or Blake, you want to add anything to how that unfolds. But, definitely using more technology in areas where we have some restrictions on how that can be done, but we want to use technology more efficient. And Blake, I know you've given some thought to this as well.
Yes, Governor. I think the real thing is getting some organic proposals from the agencies, helping them working through division budget and ops team to inform the process. Sometimes agencies, just because they have a very particular mission, become siloed on what they do, but some of the core fundamentals across agencies remain the same. So just encouraging partnership and collaboration, I think, is sort of the low-lying fruit, getting a little bit kicking the tires, scrutinizing incoming expenditures, making sure they're the ones that are the highest and best use of state resources, protecting the taxpayer, but also making sure that the high-quality services that we deliver in the state of New York continue to be so. So it's going to be an iterative process, one that we're going to work through in the next handful of months, and certainly through budget development in the fall.
Yeah, Governor, you made a reference to not letting them get away with it. Could you elaborate on that? Are you talking about going on the campaign trail? Like, what do you mean when you're saying?
Oh, no, we already are. I'll be in, if Congressman Ryan isn't having to cast votes tomorrow, I'll be in Kingston tomorrow with him, highlighting, spotlighting how devastating this is, let him tell his district about what he is fighting for. But then one of the reasons I was up in other parts of the state, as I've just described, we're taking it on the road because people need to know what we're doing and the incredible contrast between how New York State, our state government, is fighting for people and putting more money back in people's pockets, contrast to what the Republicans have done to them. So, no, that's already started.
Is that also Western New York? I know you mentioned Ryan's district. What about?
It's all on the schedule. Got a very aggressive travel schedule for the next few months. right, thank you. Oh. All right, let's talk about what New Yorkers really care about today. Why won't the Attorney General in Washington release the Jeffrey Epstein files? Because I want to know what's in them. What are they hiding? What's the cover-up all about? Just want to put out there what I think New Yorkers are having on their minds right now. If you have any answer to those questions, I'd like to hear from all of you.
Governor, yesterday on MSNBC, you said you were reassuring business leaders that you would step in in a potential Mayor Mondani administration, if they went a little too far, let's say. You said, quote, nothing is going to happen in this city without me being aware of it and involved in it. Why should anybody believe that, given the allegations that Tom Donlin has raised in his lawsuit about what has been allowed to fester in City Hall and NYPD?
Well, I didn't say I'm going to physically be in departments like the NYPD to make sure things like that don't happen, but I can also point to just less than a year ago, being very involved when there were concerns and allegations and a lot of controversy surrounding the administration associated with a lot of people around him who were leaving. And I was very involved in my behind-the-scenes way to ensure that there was a competent team in place, and there was a lot of turnover during that. So that's just one example where I'm not going to go out and do a press release on it, but I will be making sure that people know that I'm very concerned about the 8.3 million people that I also represent as the governor of the state. They're my constituents as well. And I believe that there can be a path forward that is very collaborative when people understand the balance of power, particularly. So that worked well for the incumbent mayor, who may still be the next mayor. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Who needed assistance with housing, how do you get the city of Yes over the finish line? I put $1 billion in. So I'm just saying there's areas where I'm looking forward to working with whomever the next mayor is to show a different level of collaboration that is probably unprecedented in the state of New York, because there's always historical tension between a governor and a mayor. Sometimes it's worse than others, but you've not seen that with us. I said I was going to chart a new path, govern differently, and so we'll figure it out.
And cops on the subways at night, if this is a priority, then why isn't the state going to pony up more money to keep
We
them
are.
going? So
We are. I
that's,
think things have been misrepresented. No surprise, but Catherine?
We haven't spent all of the money yet.
They haven't spent the money we gave
They
them.
haven't spent the money that they gave them, and we'll work with them going forward.
It was a shared cost. We put our money in. We're not walking away despite erroneous reports and perhaps a disgruntled City Hall staffer. I don't know where it comes from. But no, we are committed because we're seeing the results. And not just 1,000 individuals who went in during a time of crisis from the National Guard, but the number of cases, particularly on the overnight, has gone down with our 300 police officers that we're supporting at the state level. So no, those levels of cooperation are going to be ongoing. They're critically important to me.
You said that you directed the MTA to find about $300 million in efficiencies. What kinds of top-line numbers have you given to other agencies, like the Department of Health, for instance, about efficiencies on a dollar line level? And then if you said you aren't going to raise taxes on the rich, what are some other ways that you're considering to raise revenue, given the shortfalls that the state's going to be facing?
You want to take the first part, Kevin?
So obviously, the funding that we told the MTA to find was to fund their capital plan, so to support their ongoing capital plan. So it's a little different. We are not asking agencies for specific numbers. It's not how this governor works. She is about what is the most efficient way to deliver services to people and to families in the state of New York. And they have ideas all the time about how to become more efficient to do what we need to get done. And some things actually will end up costing additional funds. We cannot build a computer system to take in the information from Medicaid and SNAP on whether or not they've been working or volunteering without building something. doesn't magically, they didn't provide us with the computer system they'd like us to use. And so we will have to think about what are we not going to do in the IT world to focus on this to make sure we get it right. But we're about figuring out what's most effective, what's customer, where we really are focusing on the New Yorker as the customer for our services.
And then the part on raising revenues, have you considered different ways of how the state might approach that?
I'm in conversations with our budget department, also the legislative leaders, about how to address, again, we have the $750 million shortfall now, but as you know, that has to be made up not till March, right? And the $3 billion shortfall will occur, I believe, starting in April. So for those who think that the answer should have been devised and implemented back in the spring when we did not have any clarity on what the scale is, I would caution them to know that we are managing this, but we also know the timeline that is in front of us, and we'll meet the targets that we have to hit. But this gives us the time to really pressure test a lot more ideas and consider options. That's where we're at right now.
Governor, just to pull the thread a little bit on what you mentioned earlier about the Jeffrey Epstein controversy, is this something that you really do think that Democrats should press forward on nationally, especially going into next year? And also just on the mega bill or mega law, whatever we're supposed to call it now, how's your relationship with President Trump after all of these impacts on New York?
I've been very candid with the president about these impacts in my conversations, yes. I pointed out the impact, $13.5 billion in Medicaid cuts. I mean, I've talked about immigration. The relationship is cordial enough to have a conversation, which I think is what I've wanted to maintain, right? To be able to convey the impacts on his home state. Jeffrey Epstein, is this the driving issue into the 2026 elections? No. We have plenty of other material to work with, such as the big ugly bill. I mean, that is what's going to change people's minds about where they may have voted in the past. When they say, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know my neighbor was going to get rounded up and doesn't make pizza for me anymore. The pizzeria where he's done it for 20 years. I didn't know that my grandparents in the nursing home are going to see cuts, that they're now going to have to live on my couch instead of in a nursing home because there's not funding. So I think there's going to be so many opportunities, and it's sad to say that because I don't want these things to happen to people because I very much care about these impacts. But to the extent that they were intentional infliction of pain on residents of the state, we will be sure to make sure everyone knows about that. The Jeffrey Epstein, I think it just simply points out, trust from the people who have been supportive of the president. I think there's a trust gap there, but that's not something I plan to run on. It's something for all of you to speculate on.
Governor, there's been legislation introduced recently about banning ICE agents from wearing masks. You did mention that earlier. Just curious what your position is on that. Also, after an uptick of violence here in the city of Albany, especially by some young and younger teenagers, there's been calls to raise the age. Just curious if you also would support doing that.
I will look at legislation when it hits my desk, as always. I'm not going to telegraph at this time my position on the masks legislation, but I'll tell you at a personal level, I find it abhorrent. Literally, when I was spending my hour-plus time in the Federal Plaza trying to secure the release of one Brad Lander, I had a lot of conversation with ICE agents, very enlightening conversations with ICE agents because I had a lot of time to kill. One was interesting to me was that the ICE agents were immigrants themselves. One was from Albania, one was from Nicaragua, came here as a 7-year-old. So I got a lot of interesting information. I also asked the question, why do you have to wear the masks? They're very intimidating. And I was told that this is to protect themselves and their families from doxing and other threatening behavior. And I pointed out that I also have, thousands of state police officers. We have tens of thousands of local police officers. We have about 32,000 members of the NYPD who are often in harm's way themselves, can be recognized by defendants. We had U.S. Marshal protection when my husband was prosecuting terrorists, okay? But you don't create this climate of intimidation by donning a mask, not identifying yourself, and literally terrorizing people, whether they're in Little Haiti in Brooklyn, where I was the other day, where they had just come through and the streets were empty and people were hiding, or on a farm in the North Country, or people trying to follow the legal process in New York City, literally walking in like sitting ducks, having a piece of paper saying, I'm supposed to show up in the courtroom right now, and while they're in there, their status is lifted and they walk out in the minds of ICE that they're now criminals. So I have a real problem with it. I just need to see what the legislation looks like.
Can I ask a question, please? Can I get one question, please? I didn't get to ask a question. Can I just get one question? Governor, can I get one question, please? One question? You skipped CBS 6.